It is June 21st at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is Higher Ed Admissions Live. I'm your host, Joe Sallustio, Chief Operating Officer at Claremont Lincoln University, and today we're going to be discussing closing colleges and universities, how to help displaced students transfer credits. And ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be an amazing episode. This Admissions Live broadcast is part of the Higher Ed Live Network. All of these episodes offer you direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. And you also can be part of these live broadcasts by sharing your knowledge. Participate in today's discussion by tweeting us using the hashtag HigherEdLive. Today's live broadcast is powered by Platform Q, Education's conduit online engagement platform. Learn how to integrate continuous online engagement into your marketing and enrollment plans using Conduit. Visit platformqedu.com. All of our episodes are recorded. They're free and easy to access in the video archives at higheredlive.com, or take Higher Ed Live with you on the go by subscribing to the podcast, which we would very much appreciate. Quick plug, something that's upcoming here, guys, for all of you to tune into. You know what you stand for. You feel it in your heart. Now what? Tune into the free webinar, Making Your Mark, Unforgettable Branding, co-hosted by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency focused on higher education marketing and communications, and Zeno, a strategic branding and marketing firm for educational organizations. On Wednesday, June 26th at 2 Eastern, 11 Pacific, you'll learn how to transform your message platform into compelling and captivating creative, and how to make your website an integral part of your branding. We'll be tweeting out a link with registration information. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in live. If you are here, for those of you unable to listen that download this later, we very much appreciate it. We've got a great topic to talk about today, and even more excited about the guests that I have on today's show that I would like to introduce. First up is Mr. Travis Allen. He is the president and CEO of Trident University International. He has 20 years of experience in higher education in different types of universities in the US and down under in Australia. To learn more about Trident University International and available programs, visit trident.edu. Secondly, Dr. Michael Horwitz is the founder and president of TCS Education System, a nonprofit system of colleges and universities working to advance student success and community impact. The TCS community includes the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, Pacific Oaks College and Children's School, Dallas Nursing Institute, the Santa Barbara and Ventura Colleges of Law, Saybrook University, and Kansas Health Science Center. Visit tcsedsystem.edu for more information. Full bios for these amazing guests are included on the website for this broadcast at higheredlive.com/closing-colleges. All right, thank you for joining us, Dr. Horwitz and Mr. Allen.
Great to be with you. Thank you for having me on, Joe, and good to be with you, Travis.
Yes, thank you. Thank you both for the opportunity.
All right, so guys, what we're talking about today. I just want to start with a quick opening and talk about closing colleges and universities, which in recent times is more common than not common. As you'll see if you read any article that's posted out there, we are seeing it happen more and more often. I think it's a misconception that and it's funny because somebody asked me on LinkedIn about this broadcast, is this going to focus on for-profit colleges because a lot of them are closing? And my response was, there are a number of nonprofit private colleges that are also closing. And you'll see that a reference article regarding private nonprofits was just released by Inside Higher Ed that showed the number of them closing. And these are small schools, but they're closing all across the country. So this is a systemic problem. It has nothing to do with tax status and has everything to do with operating universities. The biggest piece and the sort of the focus of today is talking about students. And I mentioned to you both previously, prior to my time at Claremont Lincoln University, I worked at National American University, and we closed. We didn't close, but we were on the receiving end of 8 schools that closed and taking those students and transferring them in. And it is not easy. It's complicated. It's messy, and the students are upset. And that's the key piece that I think we want to talk about, is how we help students in general. And I think this is a problem that's going to continue for several years. And so I want to start with a few questions of my own to you guys and find out your experiences with this topic. But I also want to encourage the audience. You can ask questions live using the hashtag HigherEdLive. And I'll start with a few questions of my own here. So let's start off with what I think is the hardest question to answer to both of you. And Travis, I'm going to begin with you. School closings, as you know, are unfortunately more common than ever before. Why did you position your university to help displaced students?
Well, I think that's a question that, if you've been in higher education for any amount of time, you have a deep passion and commitment for students and their success. And these stories, when you hear about institutions closing and how it's impacting students, your heart tells you that you should be involved. Your heart tells you that you should be there to help. Outside of why it's the right thing to do, from an institution perspective, one of the fundamental things that I know about online learning is that if you want students that are more likely to be successful, you find students with more academic, a history of academic success. And students that are coming from institutions that are unfortunately closing are often very close to graduation, have a lot of credits, and they are the most likely to be successful of any transfer students that you can find. And so for us, what we have found is it is a great way to not only help grow our total student body, but to grow it with students that are likely going to graduate, that are going to have very successful student outcomes.
Great. Michael, how about you in TCS?
Well, I think that's a great response from Travis. I would agree that the students coming from closed institutions are academically vetted and motivated. We were really founded to address this issue in the nonprofit space, because what I saw, as you alluded to, Travis, is many nonprofit colleges that are too small are going to be challenged and are struggling. And probably from a number perspective, more nonprofits have closed in recent years than for-profits. So in many cases, as Travis said, you have outstanding students and they're seeking the degrees and professions that we educate for. And so, our arms are open to them. In our case, because with the recent Argosy closing, the quantity of students coming in was so much, we had the opportunity to hire some outstanding faculty from Argosy University. So that also, I think that was a great case for us, where the enrollment of students also allowed us to help people save their jobs.
That's an interesting point, because, when we talk about closing schools and universities, we obviously look at the stakeholders that are affected. We know that students are highly affected by this. We know that there's a lot of considerations with accreditation and those relationships. But, and it's funny that you say that, because I don't think we think about the number of people that lose their jobs. And it's not brought up very often. There's faculty, administrators, and just a group of people out there that, are passionate about helping people, but end up, losing their jobs and having to move on to something else. So, I think that's not probably discussed as much as it should be. And it's amazing that you were able to bring some people on. And I don't know that that's happening as often as it should, because teach outs are not formalized as often as they should be. Michael, were the faculty that you brought on just overjoyed with the opportunity? Was it expected? Was it surprising to them to have that opportunity? How did that go?
Well, it's a two-way street. The feedback I'm hearing from President Nealon at the Chicago School, where quite a few faculty were hired, that number one, the faculty are outstanding. And yes, they are so pleased to be, in this case, with the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. And I think they were pleasantly surprised, because when you start this complex process, you don't really know how it's going to work out. You're dealing with regulators, you're dealing with uncertain students. So until we were able to see that enough numbers were coming over that would justify hiring the faculty. But I'll tell you another interesting case that happened with Argosy University. I mean, and I think this is the case for most school closures. I mean, you kind of see it happening in slow motion until all hell breaks loose at the end. So many of the Argosy faculty were reaching out to us because they were inside and saw their institution collapsing. It wasn't a surprise to professionals in higher ed. So in a few of the locations, the Argosy faculty were very instrumental in trying to keep their student cohorts together and looking for safe harbor for, number one, the students, but then turned out for some of them as well.
Yeah, really, Joe, if I were to add, just building on what Michael is saying, I think we've been fortunate enough to be a part of, fortunate enough to be in a position to help with several of these school closures. And what makes all the difference in the world is when, and it sounds like in the case of Argosy, it was more the faculty. With two of the transfer agreements we had and one teach out, the university leadership saw it early enough and recognized the path that they were on and worked with us in a very collaborative way to where we ensured a very smooth transition for both students and faculty and staff. And because we were able to plan it out together, what it did mean, in a similar way that Michael alluded to with Argosy, we were able to bring in a significant number of their faculty and staff who understood exactly where those students were coming from. It just made all the difference in the world. Not only were the students very successful coming in, we now at Trident, it's been one of the best things that happened as a result of those two agreements that we had, is that we have these wonderful faculty and staff that are now a part of our Trident culture. So much of this, I know it's about the students, but the institutions that are in the situation of closing, if there are key leaders or faculty there that really get out in front of it, they can do so much to work with other institutions to smooth that transition for the students and to ensure that they are taken care of.
Go ahead, Michael.
No, I think that's a great point by Travis. In many cases, whether it's small nonprofits going out of business or a larger for-profit, you do have very motivated and leadership that cares about the students. One other nuance, because I have a lot of experience talking to struggling colleges, their boards and so on, often the higher level, whether it's a board of trustees of a nonprofit or an owner in a for-profit, is not in sync with the leadership that is trying to assist the students. Because in the case of Argosy, again, we had outreach not only from faculty, but from the Argosy leadership who were, really trying to do the best thing for the students. We've had the same situation with small nonprofits, but it's amazing how long boards or owners will kind of sit on the powder keg until, it's too late to do things in an orderly manner. If anything, I believe it sounds like the same for you, Travis. We think we'll enroll well over 1,000 students by fall, but I think we could have accommodated more with a more orderly process. But I don't know that the leaders at Argosy were empowered to do all that they could. Then you add in the issue of state, regional regulators, professional regulators, because in this most recent case, many of the students were enrolled in professional programs.
That's my experience as well, guys. And you know what? The one piece in there, the one caveat to that is, even when it's extremely organized, there is a point where sort of the student takes over. And even when they've been directed to, reach out in a certain way, I find that, and this is something I wanted to talk about a little bit later, but I think now's a good time. There's sort of three situations that the student can be in. Number one is the student, even in an orderly process. So let's use that as a hypothetical example. In an orderly process, you've got a student, whether they're a week away from graduating or a week into their program, they're highly motivated, they want to transfer. And they're going to find a school to transfer to, whether it's through a teach out, they're going to take the initiative, they're going to call right away, or they're going to follow the steps to go to the new institution. Two, there are some students that are so mentally blown away that their school is closed, and they have a hard time wrapping their mind around it, and literally have to go through the grieving process to some degree. Frustrated, angry, mad, and disbelief. I mean, they're going through all of that range of emotion, and many of them sort of take their time. They're not sure what to do. They wait for direction. Schools start contacting them, and some of them transfer, some of them don't. But I think the large majority, and I don't know if you guys are seeing this as well, don't do anything. They're so struck and shocked that their school is closed. These students literally disappear. Many of them seek loan discharge, and you guys know this as well as I do. Loan discharge sounds really great if you're a student, and what you don't realize is that you're going to lose all your academic credit that you received from the institution that you gained it at if you seek that loan discharge. So, I think that's a go-to for students, and then they find out that nobody, or there's very rare cases of students getting their loans discharged. They have to wait. There's a large queue. But there's those three situations. But the large majority of students don't do anything because I think there's a disbelief factor. Have you guys found that both to be true? And Travis, I'll start with you.
Well, I think what you're saying is true, generally speaking. I think we were unique in the fact that we had two agreements where they were beyond well organized. They were coordinated, and we collaborated to ensure that we created a path for the students that was equal to or better than the path they were on before. In both cases, we were able to reduce their costs. We ensured that they didn't have a longer time to completion, and staff and faculty on both sides of the institution worked to support the students. And so I think in those two cases, I think we got more than 60% of the students that were active to come over and continue on. But those were rare exceptions. Again, it was a university leadership, the ownership recognizing what was happening and working collaboratively with us to make sure that those students were taken care of. That doesn't happen most of the time. And I think what ends up happening, there's so much confusion and so much uncertainty in the situation when you can't paint a path that is very, very clear. It's normal for all the things that you just described, Joe, for students to get lost in that process and not do anything because it's so overwhelming. But I think it can be done. It just requires a tremendous amount of collaboration, if that makes sense.
Michael, your experience?
I agree with you. Most students, right, are focused on their studies. They're not tracking the health of their institution. So when the closure comes, it is absolutely devastating. You have students that are literally within a handful of credits from graduation. So, not to belabor the Argosy case, but it is unprecedented in that the students also didn't get their Title IV money. So I think, there's stipends. In other closures that I've witnessed, that's not been the case. So number one, I think your school closes, you're devastated, you're shocked, you don't know where to turn to. Most schools in the United States are not positioned to accept transfer credits beyond a certain level. So, a student may have 80 degrees toward a 120 degree credit and be told by their local university that they're limited to accepting 18 or 36 credits. So that's, you try and solve the problem, but you're met with roadblocks like that. Then here in the case of Argosy, you had the student stipends were missing somehow. So you had students that were getting evicted from their apartments. They didn't have money for rent or food. So, I mean, that's a very bad mindset with which to try and progress your academic progress, we made a decision, to be proactive and accept 100% of the credits. That meant that we had to go to a variety of regulators and get permission to do that, because we didn't want to add to the stress of saying, well, we're not going to accept your credits. You're going to have to redo another year or two. And I think by and large, the students that have come in recently have been overjoyed. They've been expressing how seamless the process was on social media. But I know that initially when we were in various open houses, in some cases, I know here in Chicago, the Illinois Board of Higher Ed, to give them a shout out, they insisted that there be open houses. And, students were rightfully suspicious of institutions coming in, because if your school closes one day, who's to say that the next institution talking to you isn't weak as well?
Did you both find, and this is not really a loaded question, it's really your experience, your accreditor, because I know that your various institutions have regional accreditation. Did you find that the accreditors were favorable, or I don't know what the word I'm looking for. They wanted your institutions to accept as many transfer credits as possible to help these students? Did you find that the accreditors were supportive of you taking these transfer credits to whatever level was appropriate to help a student?
Well, you're hitting it. It's a really complex area, because there's not only the regional accreditor, but multiple regulators. Yeah. And I would give a particular shout out to one of the leaders at Department of Ed, Diane Howard-Jones, because she sort of pulled the plug on Title IV in this case. She was very, very committed to seeing as many students as possible. So she, in turn, was communicating with the other regulators. We deal primarily with WASC, and WASC was 100% on board, as were the state regulators. I mean, I think this was the case where you had people really committed to serving the students. But, you have to kind of get them all at least on one phone call, because they all have different kind of layers of oversight of the process. And then you go even further. In some cases, you have regulators of specific degree programs like clinical psych or education and so on. Right.
Travis, how about you?
Yeah, I would 100% agree with what Michael said. I think I was just so grateful for it. WASC was just phenomenal in working with us. In one case, one of the really significant, it was an actual teach-out agreement, which we actually taught out programs that we weren't approved by WASC, BPP, or Department of Ed. And WASC, BPP, and the Department of Ed all gave us, all worked with us. And just like Michael said, we had them on conference calls talking through it and how we would ensure that we could get temporary approval, not long-term approval, to ensure that these students were taken care of for the purposes of the teach out only. And by them doing that, and it allowed us to work through issues with the Department of Ed around stipends, so that the students, and once again, this was all planned out in advance, because the owner saw it coming, and we had enough time to work with the various regulators. But I think that's the thing that is from a regulatory perspective, they're working, whether it's the regionals or the state or the Department of Ed, all trying to make sure the same thing happens, which is get these students to graduation. And so 100% the same experience. We were very grateful to the support we had from the regulatory side.
Great. So that's a good natural shift for us, because we're talking about sort of external considerations that have to be made if you're going to consider helping students from a closed institution. Let's talk a little bit about the internal mobilization that has to take place. If there's a university president or administrator out there that says, yeah, I'd like to take a closed school student. There are a lot of things that you have to consider from an operational perspective. So can you both talk a little bit about, Michael, I'll start with you, what the conversations and decision-making process looked like? scenario planning? Did you just sort of do things as they arose from an internal perspective? Talk about resources. How did that process look when you sat down and said, we're going to help in this situation? Here's what has to be done.
Yeah, all of our institutions are small to medium sized themselves. And so the premise of our nonprofit system is to create this larger set of resources on behalf of the colleges. It became clear that our biggest institution, the Chicago School, was going to be the most impacted. And so we had a team led by the president of the Chicago School, Dr. Michelle Nealon, and then our chief academic officer at TCS, Leanne Ruck, who interestingly had been the CAO of Argosy. So they formed a task force that could really drill into all of our resources. We made outreach to Argosy students a priority, so that's marketing and communications. We had to mobilize admissions operations. We had to get all the academic leaders, because all of our institutions, except for our nursing school, did take students. So we had to convene the chief academic officers and talk about transfer credits, everything down the line as we started to see the quantity, think about hiring, as I mentioned, some of the faculty, but also adding some resources on our team at the staff level. So it absolutely had to involve really almost every department at TCS, at our system office, and really at the colleges themselves. And Travis mentioned getting approval for programs that we didn't have. We even had to convene special board meetings of each of our colleges so that the board of trustees could approve taking on new degree programs. So it was a massive effort, and I don't think we could have pulled it off without our system structure.
Travis?
Yeah, very similar experience. I think in the situation, again, where and you're working with a closed institution, it's much easier to plan from a resource perspective because you have an idea of the number of students that are in the population and you make some assumptions about how many students are going to come over. In both of those major sort of agreements we had, we were able to hire a transitional team that worked to help the transition. And then we were able to also hire a set of faculty and staff that were going to be with us for the long haul to support the students. For other agreements that we've had, which I think is probably going to be the case for most other institutions where you're one of many trying to help support these students, I think it has to be more situational based on how many students actually start to come in and you react to it. Based on how much traction you're getting and trying to get those students to come in and recognize that you have a clear path for them to finish. One really unique consideration that for us, our online learning model is significantly more flexible than I would say most of the traditional online providers out there that have a highly structured learning experience and a lot of due dates and deadlines. And so for us, we had to be very cognizant of the fact that our model that typically works very well for a senior enlisted military student that's very disciplined is going to require more support for a student that's coming out of a highly structured environment. And so that was one thing we did anticipate, and our faculty were just fantastic as far as surrounding these students to make the transition. Because in a lot of cases, it was like these students were going from a situation where they were riding with training wheels to not, because our learning model is just different than other online providers. And so I think recognizing and understanding how your programs are structured compared to where the students are coming from is a really important thing to evaluate as you go through this process.
So Travis, sort of staying on that line of thinking, talk to me about sort of a normal transfer student coming in from an institution that wants to come to Trident sort of through the normal pathway versus a student who's been displaced by a closed institution. How does that process differ for those two types of students? I mean, is it different?
Yeah, well, what we found is really important is even so, like I would use the Argosy example. We weren't in a situation that it sounds like Michael and his team were, where we had sort of an inside track. We were working with inside track because there's programs aligned. I didn't mean that the wrong way.
Right.
The programs aligned a lot better. It made a lot more sense. We were in a situation wanting to help, but not sure how many students were going to come to us. That said, we set up a dedicated set of student-facing teams. So when those students come in, that they work with teams, with advisors that know specifically about how the programs map into ours, that can support them and deal with questions that come up for students that are in that situation. So having dedicated teams, I think, is a really important first step. From there, as the students come into the classroom, once again, we're making sure that the faculty that are teaching those first courses, those transitional courses, are aware that there is a high number of these students coming in, and to make sure to provide additional support. So I think a big part of this is training and awareness, and having dedicated teams and faculty awareness where the students are coming in. If you can create the strong articulation and the strong maps to where it paints a clear path, it's all about easing the frustration and the fear of those students. And staff and faculty that understand that and are trained and recognize these students can make a huge difference in that process.
And Michael, when it's sort of going on the same topic, when we look at, as you set this up, especially in a system that has multiple institutions, even when you align this, what Travis is talking about, and you provide a clear path to the student, is there still a good amount of risk up front that you have to take as an administrator to say, you know what, I'm going to allocate these resources. We're going to take some financial risk here from an internal perspective, knowing that we're feeling confident that we're going to get some students.
Absolutely, because just like Travis said, we essentially had to create a unit devoted to the Argosy student. Without knowing, how many would eventually come in. It turns out that the process was smooth and it was justified to do so, but we had to dedicate a tremendous amount of time and resources. And now it's interesting, now that we have a term underway, initially they were the Argosy students, but now they are Pacific Oaks students and Saybrook students and colleges of law and Chicago School students. And so we're having to make that transition internally we just have new students that came in an unusual way, but we're very happy to have them. But absolutely, you take a risk when you do this. It's the right thing to do. And going back to Travis's earlier comments, these are students that are clearly devoted to their education. So I think it's a good risk, because our focus is really to get students who are going to graduate and become great professionals. And so coming out of a closed school, there's every indication that they're going to be successful and become great alumni.
So let's talk, Travis, just really quickly, since you talked about the training, easing the frustration of students. And let's talk about the customer service, right? Because the students coming in, they're someone that you want, especially if they're somebody who's likely to graduate, which you imagine these students are. How important is customer service to these students? And have you seen or heard situations where students just sort of have a bad experience, just a little bit of a bad experience, and disappear because they're not trusting of institutions in general, because they're still dealing with that loss?
Yeah, well, and 100%. And I think in most cases, the customer service is super important. And I would say even beyond customer service, it's just having staff and faculty that can show empathy for the situation that they're in and help them to understand that there is a very clear path forward. And I think because we've done enough of these, that our team does a really good job of that. And I think typically we do okay there. I think the hard part is, and this is, I know this, to me, I honestly think it's better when you can get to a place where there's one or two schools working as opposed to a lot. Because I think what happened, I think even in the example of the Argosy students, they're talking to 5 or 6 schools. And they're trying to make it, they're trying to sort out which one's going to be better for them. And it gets all very confusing and very overwhelming. And I think that's part of the reason why it goes the other way. So I think it's realizing as part of this from a customer service standpoint, what they're going through, and they're likely talking to somebody else. They're likely talking to somebody else, evaluating whether they sought them out or however the process happens. So it's very important.
And Michael, from your perspective, the customer service?
Is absolutely critical, because as we discussed, the psychological state is it's very traumatic. In the past, we've dealt with 2 small institutions where we had an exclusive agreement, as Travis suggests. That was simple. This is the crossover. Arrangements have been made. In this case, not only were there so many were in online programs, talking to many institutions. And then you had geographic considerations where multiple institutions in a certain city were talking to Argosy students. So the customer service is critical. And again, we did a lot of training internally to welcome Argosy students specifically and make it as smooth as possible. But Travis is absolutely right. There's a lot of traffic and noise crossing, the closed school student.
So you both positioned your institutions to help students coming from a closing institution in multiple examples. Do you think that it's an easy decision to make to help these students, or is it a hard decision to make? And the second part of that question would be, for other university presidents or administrators out there in public, nonprofit, for-profit, whatever, do you think it's easy to not help? Is it just sort of, is it easier for someone to stay out of the fray of dealing with this type of issue than not? I know that's sort of the same question twice, but I think it's very important. And Travis, go ahead, you start.
Yeah, I think for certain institutions, I think that there is risk. It is messy, and it can be. I will say this: one of the agreements, the best example I can give is one of the agreements was very complicated, even though. Because it wasn't the program offering we had. We had to stretch outside. We had to bring faculty in. We had to go through all these regulatory approvals. And I will say I was not popular with my leadership team for a while as we worked through that process, because it was painful. It was painful to work through it, and there was a fair amount of risk that it wasn't going to go smoothly. Now everyone recognizes we got new programs out of the process. We expanded we got new faculty. It really has put us in a different place as an institution. So it's not without pain. It's not without financial risk. It's not without regulatory risk, because you're exposing yourself to a certain extent to take on responsibility for these students. And so I absolutely think there are a set of institutions that those risks are just too much for different reasons. I think the reward, as Michael said, it comes back to what we're here to do is to help students achieve their educational goals. And these are students that need that more than ever and are more likely to accomplish it. And so you have to weigh those risks. You have to weigh those risks as an institution. But these are absolutely students that will complete if you can figure out a way to provide the support necessary.
That's really interesting, Travis, because I wrote an article for The Evolution, and it was about stepping up to help students from a closed school. And part of what I said in the article was, and you guys know this, we change lives. When you hear that throughout your life in education, we change lives. You've heard different variations of it. You change lives. And it's maddening to me when I've had students come back and ask me for help or whatever, to say, I went over to XYZ institution and they said, my credits won't transfer there. And, here's a student 6-9 credits away from achieving a bachelor's degree. And I can't even imagine. And I don't think, unless you're a student that's come from a closing institution, you can truly understand the emotion that comes with something like that. And we've all been in different degrees, and you imagine yourself being 6, 9, 12 credits, even half away from completing, and then be told, you got to go somewhere else, and have that institution tell you, sorry, you're going to have to take more credits than you thought you were going to take. I think probably everybody that's listening today knows somebody that's had this happen. I mean, it's common enough now, or somebody. It's just completely maddening to have an institution say we change lives. and then turning these students away. I think it's completely counterproductive to why we as administrators work, or anyone work in education. It's so counterintuitive to be in that place. And Michael, do you see that sort of perspective, and when you talk about this issue of students and helping them, that it's just sort of easy to let it go because it's hard?
Yeah, no, I like the way you posed that question. I founded TCS in the nonprofit space for exactly that purpose, to be able to maximize student success and community impact and be able to help students. So, Argosy is not the first time. As I said, we've dealt with smaller institutions. It's absolutely easier to walk away and not help or give lip service. So I think many institutions said, students are welcome, but then they run into the buzzsaw, as you said, of traditional transfer credits. You have to go the extra mile, get the approval from the regulators, mobilize internally, and do the right thing. We educate in disciplines, mental health and nursing and public service attorneys and educators that the United States is short of. So we feel great about adding to the roster of our institutions and having more of those students come in. And it was painful. We were not able to assist in the Argosy situation in some of the geographies where we're not located and where online was not appropriate. So students were sort of at the mercy of whatever local institutions chose to do, or in many cases not to do, because it is kind of easy, as you said, to sort of look the other way or just give lip service to it.
So, Michael, talking about that just a little bit, we know, and you've had some benefit for your institutions, accepting these Argosy transfer students or any teach out you've done before, that obviously increasing your population at your partner institutions is one benefit. What are the other benefits of helping these students besides doing the right thing? What are the internal benefits when you look at how your institutions run?
Well, I'm a firm believer since when I started as a president in higher ed, I oversaw an institution with 200 students, and today we're going on 10,000. And I think that growth leads to more resources and more quality. I think, Travis, you were suggesting the same thing. So we're able to bring on more outstanding faculty. We're able to have more resources for the institutions broadly, whether it's technology or learning resources. So, we believe in our mission. We're serving communities and disciplines that are critically important. So from my point of view, the more students we have, the richer our community is. We're a more diverse community. We have more opportunity to engage students with each other. It's been a win-win for us. The pain is kind of short term in the integration, but as I say, as we head to fall term, the students are the students of our colleges and universities, and so we're enriched by their presence.
Great. And Travis, as another presidential point of view, what are those internal benefits look like to Trident?
I think Michael said it really well. The only thing I would just add is, in the case where you can get that more established partnership with the institution, the benefits become 10x. Not because all the reasons that Michael just said apply, but then you really work to bring faculty and staff over and program offering that will strengthen your university for a long time. A great example I can give you is, I think with one of the closures, we were able to bring 6 student advisors over, and those 6 student advisors are still here, and they approach student support in a way that just has really improved our student services department. Culturally, they are more proactive, and it's rubbed off, and it's been something that's happened a lot faster than if it was being driven from the leader in that department. One of the teach outs, we were very wonderful to get a tremendous faculty member that went on to become our associate dean of business, and as beloved by all administrators and students, and just made a big difference. I just think so much of this, if you do it right, you're bringing part of that culture into your culture and strengthening your culture, so the institution is stronger as a result. But that only happens if there's a lot of collaboration and partnership up front. If right. not, it's more the things that Michael was talking about.
I think that's an excellent point by Travis. I see this especially in small nonprofit institutions that they've become weak because they're so insular. They're talking to themselves. So that's absolutely a strength out of working with closed school students, that you get the perspectives from another institution, from staff, faculty, students, that make your institution stronger. You also get to see what are the mistakes that led to this situation. So you continue to be a learning organization yourself.
It's in one, I don't know if you guys found the same benefit, but one I found was, when you go through this the first time, at National American University, I went through this a number of times with schools that were closing, and you go through it the first time and you're really clunking through it. You're trying to mobilize a team, you're training them, trying to figure out how the regulators work. And then what happens is, because it will continue to happen, a school is going to close, and they go, and there's a reputation built as your institution develops a reputation as someone who can help. The amount of knowledge your staff gains from going through this process of helping these students and transferring them in and dealing with transcripts and dealing with financial aid, it's completely invaluable training. And then, in my experience in moving to a nonprofit here at Claremont Lincoln University and having those Argosy students be interested in our institution, we didn't have the depth of knowledge here to know what to do. So I was able to bring that experience forward from, my National American University to Claremont Lincoln University and go, oh, here's how you do it. And there are some that they can't get the thoughts around, how do you take 600 students at one time? How do you take 1,000? How do you take 100? It's just mind blowing. And so the amount of knowledge that's gained from this is really invaluable. Did you guys see that happen, Michael, at your institution?
No, that is a really great point. I mean, we had so many staff members working hard, and many had never dealt with this. And so we have developed so much expertise in dealing with this kind of situation. And we really think of ourselves as pioneers in the nonprofit space. And we don't ever want to become the settlers and just settle into the idea that we know everything. And so dealing with something unprecedented like this, coordinating regulatory perspectives, training admission staff to, on one day have to talk about transfer in the traditional way and now have to be trained in a whole other mode. Absolutely fantastic learning experience for our organization.
Travis, do you find that internally there, Trident, as well?
Yeah, for sure. And the only thing I would add, in our current environment, you can't be an institution. Michael, I can't remember the expression that you used, but you can't be an institution that's okay with being the same, or an institution that is going to move really slow, unless you're publicly funded and have a very big shield around you. For the confidence that we gained as an institution from doing it, these teach-outs and the transfer agreements, that we can do hard things, we can come together as a university across our academic departments and our various operational departments, do things in a coordinated way quickly and be successful at them. I think that confidence has helped us execute on other initiatives that are propelling the university forward right now, and dealing with other change that we're dealing with in a way because, hey, we did it, we can do it. So it's the institutional confidence that I think is another big takeaway.
Yeah, and actually, I would say, these days there's nobody with a shield around them, because I think in today's higher ed press, the discussion that many state universities are suffering from budget cuts, and it disproportionately falls on the campuses that are not the flagship. So, when I look out there, even in the public universities, you have the real forward-leaning ones like Arizona State that have coupled, big growth with amazing growth in quality and academic recognition. I think it's, again, because their leadership has pointed the institution outward and been very forward-looking in terms of access. So that, the more we learn about creating access for students, I think it couples with the opportunity for academic resources and excellence.
You know, I'll get to my last, and I think probably the most important question, the opinion-based question I'm going to ask you guys. But, you know, one other interesting thing is, and I'm sure you both went through it, is when you're going to take students from a closing institution, boy, does it make you challenge your internal policies and your catalog. And, you know, you end up dusting off these policies that are so restrictive because you decide to help a student and you go, wait a minute, who the heck developed this? We need to change this. And to Travis' point, you have to move fast. And, you know, traditionalism in higher ed is slow, and you have to be fast. And you know, it's one great benefit is that it really forces you to look at your policies and say, is this right? Is this flexible for us to be able to move in a new competitive environment of higher ed? Did you guys see that happen in your policies as you looked at them, Travis?
Yeah, definitely. And I've been, this is my 4th year at Trident, so I can't, Michael has a much longer history as a founder. So probably his policies, he had a hand on a lot of them, but in a lot of cases, there were policies that I didn't even know were policies until they became a problem as it related to a potential transfer student. And then it would be, well, why? What is the purpose of that? What is that trying to achieve? And how does that ensure our students are successful? So definitely uncovers some of the wards that are impacting our current students as well that needed to be fixed for sure.
And Michael?
Yeah, I had a mentor, Harry O'Donnell, who used to say most of the world is focused on better, faster, and less expensive, and higher ed is focused on, you know, do it the same way, more expensive, and, you know, just take our time about it. And the world isn't built that way anymore, including in higher education. So yeah, we have a whole academic compliance unit, and it was an opportunity to get them focused on all the policies and see what we needed to change. And you're absolutely right. Whenever you do that exercise, you uncover policies that are not as student friendly as you thought they were.
All right, we actually just had a question come in from Twitter, live on the Twitter handle, hashtag Higher Ed Live. And this one's from Michael, from Mark in Missouri. Your system now has more than 1,000 students pursuing degrees, transfer students pursuing degrees in psychology, education, and so forth. From my perspective, in Missouri and across the nation, we have shortages of these and other professions with a technical sort of leaning technically. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mark. I think that's why we were so hell-bent on transferring in the students and the presidents of our colleges, every single one of them. I mean, we educate for professions that are massively in demand. So I'm glad that Mark is underscoring that for Missouri. But wherever we go, whether here it's in the city of Chicago or rural areas, people say we can't hire a counselor or a psychologist. There are many communities that are not educating enough teachers. You know, our law school educates students for public service law, where there's actually an undersupply. So absolutely, you know, that was a motivator for us, thinking that those students are going to graduate in the next few years and go on to serve their communities. And hopefully some of them will go down to Missouri and help out Mark.
Mark, thanks for the question. All right, guys, so sort of getting down to our wrap-up point, and so I want to ask you both this question. You know, at Claremont Lincoln University, we teach students to be socially conscious and to have a social awareness. And so I believe that it was my responsibility as an administrator to step up and help students when these closures happen. So as presidents or as individuals who run institutions or institutions that have multiple campuses and multiple locations, do you believe, and Travis, I'll start with you, it's our social responsibility to help in these situations as a university president? And if so, why?
Oh, absolutely. I think it goes back to a comment that I said earlier. I'm in higher education because I want to help students accomplish their educational goals. And if I'm really committed to that, these are students that absolutely are committed to that, but need help getting there. And I think it goes beyond stepping up to help. I think as an institution, we have to be committed to create a path that is equal to or better than the path that they were on in terms of time to completion and overall cost. And because a lot of the normal expenses that come along with new students coming into the university aren't there, it gives you the chance to say, how do I create something that's very compelling for these students so they will want to finish because they're at that time and place where they need that strong motivation. So 100% yes.
Great. Michael, is it our social responsibility as presidents and administrators to help?
Yeah, it sounds like Travis and I are on the same page. We have this philosophy here of radical cooperation at TCS. We think higher education should cooperate more. It's an incredibly siloed space. Institutions, even internally, often don't cooperate across departments or across schools. It's our social responsibility to educate students who want to get an education. So I'm really glad you framed it that way because we're about student success and community impact. If there's students left without their college, then it is the responsibility of the higher ed sector to step up and address it.
Well, I'll tell you what, gentlemen, I want to thank you both for participating in this Admissions Live broadcast with Higher Ed Live. I will tell you that it gives me great hope and a confidence in our higher ed system to know that we have leaders out there like yourselves who believe in truly helping students and doing whatever it takes to get there to help those students. I know that those students who've transferred to your institutions from Argosy are in great hands, and I have no doubt that as this podcast becomes available and those students watch, that they'll have even more confidence than they have in your institutions. And, I'll let you both, if you have any plugs that you want to make about your institutions or any events that you're going to be at, I'll give you guys the last word and then we'll wrap it up here. Michael, I'll start with you.
Well, first of all, it's been a pleasure having the discussion with you. We're really happy to welcome the students from Argosy and other institutions that are struggling. Again, we educate students for student success and community impact across the Chicago School, Pacific Oaks College, Saybrook University, Dallas Nursing Institute, the Colleges of Law. Our newest affiliate is actually going to be a startup medical school, the Kansas Health Sciences Center. So we're very happy to welcome students and welcome people to follow me on Twitter as well as on LinkedIn. And thank you very much, Joe, for the exposure. You're really highlighting a very, very important topic and keeping things fresh and energetic in the higher ed space.
Thank you, sir. Travis.
Yeah, I just agree. Thank you, Joe, for the opportunity and for hosting this important discussion. And hopefully it benefits some institutions out there that are considering the options. And hopefully there are institutions out there that are on the other side of this that are thinking through how they go at it. And because there is a better way that it can be done. Trident is a really unique institution. We pride ourselves on our student outcomes. For an online institution, we really have some of the highest student outcomes, whether it's around graduation rate, student indebtedness, cohort default rate, a lot of those measures that are out there. And because of the unique nature of our learning model, that attracts really strong, high quality students. And I would just say that what we do really well for anybody that's interested, whether it's a potential institution or student considering, is we find a way to ensure that what they've done before will continue on and they will have a path that is shorter or better than the path that they were on. So you can learn more about Trident at trident.edu. And like Michael said, I'd be happy to connect with you on LinkedIn as well.
And for those of you listening out there, guys, that if you're a student looking to transfer, you're an administrator considering whether you can help these type of students, hopefully this conversation that Travis, Michael, and I had gives you at least a high-level roadmap of the things that you have to consider, which was really the goal for today, because I'm going to challenge everybody in the higher ed space to step up and help these students. It is just not okay in my mind to be able to say you change lives and not do anything about it. These guys on this podcast are the cream of the crop. If you have questions, I'm sure they'll take them on how the heck you go about this. These guys are experts in what they do. And again, I appreciate everybody listening in, and we'll be in touch very, very soon for the next Admissions Live broadcast on Higher Ed Live. Thank you, everybody. Travis, Michael, thank you.
Thank you.